Welcome to TFP, the Theater Folk Podcast, the place to be for drama teachers, drama students, and theater educators everywhere. I'm Lindsay Price, resident playwright for Theater Folk. Hello. I hope you're well. Thanks for listening. Alrighty, welcome to episode 122. You can find any links for this episode at the show notes at theaterfolk.com/episode 122. Now, today we are talking about a very important subject. We are talking about a subject that many people are confused about, that we get a lot of questions about, and it's time to stop the confusion. So we are actually talking about copyright. We're going to clear up some copyright confusions, questions, and I have here Theater Folk's own copyright guru, Craig Mason.
Hello, Lindsay Price.
How did you like that intro? That was pretty good.
I have to say, I'm a little bit nervous about that introduction because I do not consider myself a guru. I consider myself someone who's acquired some knowledge that I'm happy to share. However, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to be giving anybody any legal advice. So, copyright is a legal matter. So I really encourage everyone to consult with an actual copyright attorney before doing anything. However, I will be happy to share as much as I can in the guru-like manner in which you have introduced me.
And I have to say, in another life, you were an actor and you never even played a lawyer on TV, did you?
No, I always turn the sound off when there's like a drug ad and they're doing like the big legal disclaimer. I turn that off. I don't even listen to that. So that's how not a lawyer I am.
See, that's my favorite part. Okay, but you do have some knowledge. We have some knowledge here at Theater Folk.
Well, we've been going for about 20 years now as a publishing company. And that was one of the first things I had to educate myself on was copyright, because copyright falls under a field of law called intellectual property. And that is basically the foundation of our business is intellectual property, creations of the mind. So it was very important for me to understand what it means when there's a copyright symbol on a script and how we go about obtaining copyright on a script and how to protect the author's copyrights and so on. There was a lot to learn, and I feel it's very valuable for a drama teacher to learn this as well because they're dealing with all this material all the time, and I feel like they're not given any more information than any other teacher is given, and a drama teacher is dealing much more closely with intellectual property matters than a normal teacher.
Well, sure, because we're talking about, intellectual property, as you said. They're creations of the mind. What is a play but a creation of the mind? And also in the classroom, they're dealing with creations of the mind all the time. But let's get right into, what is that word copyright? What does that actually mean?
Copyright basically means the right to copy. I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to talk about intellectual property. I just want to set everything straight. People use copyright to refer to all sorts of parts of intellectual property, and it's misused a lot, that word. Intellectual property covers every kind of creation of the mind. Like, it's talking about patents. It's talking about the packaging of products. It's talking about trademarks, like the McDonald's Golden Arches or Mickey Mouse, the Disney character. And copyright's just one part of that. Like, a patent and copyright are two different things, but they fall under intellectual property. So today, when we're talking about copyright, we're specifically referring to the creations of the mind that tend to be more of an artistic nature. So copyright would cover things like a novel, a play, a song, a composition, artwork, a drawing. Patents cover things like inventions. Trademarks cover things like slogans and logos. There are various other forms of intellectual property, but I just want to be clear that when you're talking about copyright and copyright terms and copyright ownership, it has its own set of rules. And so for the purposes of what we're talking about today, I'm talking just about those artistic creations, theater, music, dance.
Okay, that's good to know. It's really large, isn't it? The whole thing is quite large.
It's a very large field. There are lawyers who specialize in intellectual property as a whole, but on the most part, they are individual specialties. You'll find lawyers who deal with patents. You'll find lawyers who deal with an area called trade dress or trademarks or copyright. It's that specialized, this type of law.
Okay, so if a copyright is going to protect an artistic endeavor, like a play, what does that play have to be in order to be protected by copyright? Like, there's got to be some rules that come into play for that.
Surprisingly, there are very few rules in terms of what one must do in order to copyright a play. Copyright becomes in effect the second that your work is fixed. And by fixed, they mean written down. And that includes hitting the save button on your Microsoft Word. The second you have created that, it is protected. Now, I just want to be clear that copyright does not protect ideas. If you say, I have an idea for a play about a girl who goes on a journey and, finds a witch, that's not a copyrightable thing. Copyright protects you when you take that idea and express it in a dramatic form. Then you're protected by copyright.
And that's really funny because I talk to as a playwright myself, and I'm in conversation with playwrights all the time, and it's surprising how many of them don't believe that to be true. That they don't believe that the instant their work becomes fixed, that they're covered, that they have to, there's the old adage that you can put your play in the mail and then send it to your self-registered mail, and that means you've got copyright, or that you have to put the C symbol on your script, or that you have to register it. And it's something that is, I guess it's just something that people have been told over and over again, and then they believe that those other things have to be in place.
Certainly, and for good reason. There are some advantages to putting the copyright. You should always put the copyright notice on your script. However, it is not required in order for your script to be protected by copyright. There are advantages. You have advantages if something ever comes to trial, for example. It's a clear indication that the infringer should have known that your work was protected. There are advantages to registering with a government copyright office. In different, I believe, U.S. courts and other courts, it gives you certain areas of damages that you can claim. However, none of it is actually required in order to enjoy copyright protection.
Okay, so we've got a play, and it's something that a drama teacher wants to put on. So what are some of the things that they have to be aware of that copyright protects? If they've got a play in their hands, what are some of those things that they have to be aware of that this play might be covered under copyright? Okay,
so when we're talking about copyright, we're talking about a bundle of several protections. One is the right to copy. So the right to actually publish the script as a book, or photocopy the book that is there, or scan the book into a computer, or even write the whole book out by hand. I once worked with a director who avoided paying for scripts for his production by handwriting out the scripts. He had very neat handwriting, and then giving us all copies. I mean, it was ludicrous. However, that was definitely a violation of copyright. So that's one thing. So just the copies, the act of making a copy of, it's the same with a book. These are the same protections that a book has. Next is the right to a public performance. The author of a play is the sole decision maker, basically, as to whether or not you can perform a script for an audience or read a novel for an audience. That is one of the rights that is given to the author. Now, when an author signs a contract with a publisher like us, they basically give us permission to assign those rights. And the way that permission is given to the author is in payment of a royalty, which is a fee that the author gets.
Now, this is a question that comes up time and time again, particularly in our market, which is schools. And that is, I don't have to pay a royalty, do I, if there's no ticket price? Why do I have to pay a royalty if there's no ticket price?
Okay, well, if you go back and listen to what I said, no, seriously.
He's not a guru, but he is a teacher.
I'm not trying to, I'm sorry. It sounded like I was chastising you, but let's just go back and look at what I said. The copyright gives the author the sole decision as to whether or not the play can be performed in front of an audience. Now, if you listen to that, I did not mention for profit. I didn't mention for fun. I didn't mention in an educational setting. That is the right of the author. Now, some authors might waive royalties for school productions if there's no fee being paid, or if there's no admission charge, or if it's not being done for profit. However, the vast majority do charge a royalty fee. I mean, when I think of our playwrights here at Theatre Folk, that is the sole source of their income as playwrights, from these royalty fees. And, if we waived all fees for all good purposes, and I believe that every time someone puts on a play for any reason, they're putting it on for a great purpose, then first of all, the author is not going to be compensated for his or her work. And second of all, you are not going to be encouraging that author to write anything else. And I feel when you pay your royalty, it's a fine encouragement for the author to say, okay, this is the type of thing that people want, and I'm going to create more works like this. So I think the model works very well.
And I think that's something that teachers need to know. Not only do they need to know, they need to be telling it to their students that every time. Dress rehearsal, are you putting it up in a public performance? So that means there's an audience. A royalty needs to be paid. If it's a charity event you're doing, a royalty needs to be paid. If you're doing it and it's just friends and family, a royalty needs to be paid. And it's amazing how often that question comes up where we get calls and teachers are begging us to waive this royalty. But it's just as you say, Craig, this is how the playwright is trying to make their living. And personally, as a playwright, I don't know, man. It's such a weird thing that there is no salary, that there is no weekly wage. It's whether or not someone chooses to do your play. But then there's a lot of freedom too. It's a very weird thing for me personally.
It is. It's really one of the only places where, a member of the general public has to pay a royalty. But however, what you have to understand is that basically any time you buy a product, you're paying royalties. It's just usually bundled in with the price. This is just one of those rare situations where the royalty is a separate charge. Like when you buy a car, you're paying hundreds and hundreds of royalties to various inventors of various components on the car. It's just bundled in with the price of the car, and so you don't really notice it.
Okay, so we've got copyright protects the copying, it protects the public performance, and then here's another question that comes up quite a bit. Changes. And I had one this week where I got a call and they were like, well, we want to add another character and then we want to add some time. Or we get calls all the time for, can I change this character from a male to a female? We need to cut this for competition. These are the common problems of the school market, and they happen all the time, but we are dealing with copyright with the notion of changes, aren't we?
Yes. So now we're into the third big key here with copyright, and that is the right to make derivative works.
Oh, what is that? What does derivative mean?
A derivative is something that's based on something else. So a derivative work would be if you were to take the play, and I'll do a gross example here. If you were to take the play and translate it into Italian, so you are now making a derivative work. Another type of derivative work would be a radio performance or a film. You're making a derivative version of that original work. And then also covered under this notion of derivative works is changing the script. Because even if you're adding one line to a play, you're making, in essence, an entirely new version of the play, except for one line. And that's considered to be a derivative work. And that's why one must always seek permission from the writer or the writer's agent or the publisher anytime you want to make a change to a play.
And so if under protection of copyright, if the playwright is also protected for derivative works, that means they own them, right? The playwright is the one who gets to say what happens to these derivative works.
For sure. There have been examples of playwrights who have been in rehearsals, for the first performance of a play. And, actors have contributed lines throughout the course of rehearsal, and the playwright has adopted them into the script. And then later, the actors have tried to get some sort of compensation for their contribution to the play. And certainly the results of the court challenges I've seen indicate that those changes still belong to the playwright. For the reason being that the playwright was the one who had the sole decision as to whether or not those lines would be included in the script.
Ah, okay. So it seems to me that copyright is very protective of the creator, isn't it?
It is. It's ruthlessly protective of the creator. One could argue that it's protective to a fault. Copyright, every few years, the laws change, and it always seems to be made stronger and stronger in favor of the creator. And that's thanks to big corporations who are trying to protect assets that they've acquired. However, that it is the law. So even though you may not like it, it's something you do have to be aware of and to follow if you do not want to get in trouble.
And I think that's the other thing that happens at the school level is that people don't know that there's laws, that it's not just copyright that is a thing that, that a playwright is making your life more difficult. It's law. It's copyright law.
Mm-hmm. And I know from our perspective, and certainly the authors that we represent, their perspective, when people request a change to a script, we always entertain it. We always look at it and consider it, and we might get into a discussion with the author and get back to you. And that's always fine. The author may or may not agree with that change, and that's their prerogative. But it's that's just part of what we do, and it's normal, and it's fine. It's fine to ask. We really appreciate when people ask. However, when we find out that someone has gone ahead and made changes without the author's approval, it's not a good situation. It's incredibly disrespectful of what the author has created, and I've seen authors get very upset about this.
So what do teachers need to know, bottom line, when they are putting on a play? What are like 3 things that they must make sure that they are going to follow through in terms of copyright?
Well, first of all, perform the play as written. And so if you're not going to perform the play as written, there's changes that need to be made for whatever reason. Contact the publisher. Contact whoever it is that you're paying royalties to, and they will get you into the right direction for, to go through that process. Number 2, for all of this stuff, give yourself a lot of time. A lot of time. Sometimes these conversations can take a while. And I find that more often than not, we get these change requests and they need them sorted out by the end of the weekend. And it's not fair to us, and it's not fair to our playwrights. I understand that things come up, but please give us all a lot of time to deal with this stuff. We're in your corner. We want you performing these plays, and we want you to be performing them in the conditions that you need to perform them in. So please give us lots of time. And I'd say the third, Lindsay, is just when you're rehearsing the play, just use the word respect when you're thinking about the changes. I mean, when you want to change a play, you want to think of the playwright and what they were thinking when they were writing the play. We'll often get 5 pages of change requests where kids have written a bunch of jokes, and that's really cool. But then it'll always end with, do you see we've maintained the playwright's intention? No, you haven't maintained the playwright's intention. The playwright's intention is the words that were on the page. So just understand that playwright spent a lot of time, well, Lindsay, how many hours does it take you to write a play?
I cannot tell you. Well, I'll tell you this for something. A full-length play can take up to 2 years. Okay,
so you've spent a lot of time, the playwright spent a lot of time poring over those words. And so when you're approaching for changes, just spend a few minutes trying to figure out where the playwright was coming from for those bits that you're looking to change.
And I'll say this, never say, hey, can we just have an email giving us permission to just make changes? Because no. The answer will be no.
No, and I'm going to add a fourth one to my list. Be specific. If you need to change something, be very specific. Page 5, we need to cut the word damn because we're a Christian school and we don't say the word damn on stage. That's a specific request. A request like, our school is Christian and we have certain sensibilities and we need to make a bunch of changes. Can we change it? That's not a specific request. Just so be very specific. It might be laborious on your part, and I'm sorry about that. We want the playwrights to have a full understanding of what it is that you want to do before we make a decision as to whether or not that's going to be good.
Okay, so now I got another brain teaser for you. What can teachers do to prevent copyright confusion in their students so that the next generation has a clear idea of how to use copyright? What's something that a teacher could do in the classroom with their students?
I think a couple things. I think you could play this podcast for them. I think students would be able to follow this and understand what it is that we're talking about. I think another thing is to involve them in the production end of the process. After rehearsals, why don't you grab the cast together for a little meeting and pull out your budget and your production contracts and, go through the step-by-step process of how it is that this play came to be. I think there's a lot of valuable information that they can learn. It's funny when we go to conferences sometimes and, Lindsay, you're sitting there and kids look confused when they meet you because they don't really connect that there's a real person there and who's behind these plays. And I think doing something like a little post-mortem where you look at all the components that went into the play behind the scenes that they weren't involved in, to show emails between you and the publisher or you and the playwright. Show them, your budget. Show them your contract. Show them what the contract says about changes to the script. I think that'd be a very valuable experience in addition to all the other valuable things that we learn when we put together a play.
I think that when people make these mistakes, 9 times out of 10, it's because they didn't know and nobody taught them. We've had to teach ourselves, right, for a lot of these things. And when we're dealing with copyright, when we're dealing with creations of the mind, we are all in the same boat. We are all under the same sort of umbrella. And it's important I think respect is a great word.
For sure. And that's a funny thing because I think, do you remember there was a time where you wrote an adaptation of a poem?
I did.
And we later learned that it was still protected by copyright. It was old and we thought it was in the public domain. And we since learned that it was still protected. So now we have this awesome play that's sitting in a drawer just waiting for a couple more years to pass that we can share with you.
And that's a great thing to sort of like, our last thing that we'll talk about is, say you're one of those people, it's like, I can't pay royalties, I can't do this. Okay, so where are the places that you can look that aren't covered by copyright? And that would be?
Well, what you're looking for is works that are in the public domain. And by public domain, I mean that the copyright on them has lapsed. It is ended. We'll link to in the show notes. There are some flowcharts that will help you determine what is and what isn't in the public domain. And the reason for that is that the laws have changed many, 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 many times over the years. And so I think half that reason, Lindsay, when you mentioned before about putting the copyright notice or registering with the Copyright Office, there was a time where it was vital to register a work, to renew a work, to put the copyright notice. And so works would get different types of protection, whether they had done those steps. That's why some more modern things like lapse into the public domain. Like one great example is It's a Wonderful Life very briefly lapsed into the public domain because there was a copyright that didn't get renewed, but it is now protected again by copyrights. Anyhow, there's a whole flowchart of things to go through. But the big ones are, Shakespeare, the Greeks. Interesting thing with something like the Greeks or Moliere is that the original work is in the public domain, but the English translation may or may not be protected by copyright, depending on all the same other rules when it was written, whether it was renewed or not.
Yeah, so the bottom line is check, because it's really funny. I was a T.S. Eliot poem that I was adapting into a play, and some of T.S. Eliot's works are in the public domain and some are not. It's not, you can't make an assumption, and also you can't make an assumption for what country you're in, because the term of when you can use an author's work after death is different in Canada and the States.
It is. For the most part, just about every country, certainly any country that anyone is listening to this from, they're all signatories to an agreement, an international copyright or intellectual property agreement called the Berne Convention, Berne, after Bern, Switzerland, where it was signed.
Yes.
This is a copyright, not a geography podcast. And the Berne Convention gives a certain base amount of protection. So now for modern works, when does something enter the public domain? It's pretty clear. It's 50 years after the author's death. However, individual countries are allowed to extend those protections and make those protections stronger. And that is what happened in the US with actually something that was derisively referred to as the Mickey Mouse Copyright Protection Act that the late great Sonny Bono introduced. That extended the term of copyright to 70 years, basically to protect the first Mickey Mouse movie from entering into the public domain. So in the US, it's 70 years after the death of the author, and in Canada and a lot of other countries, it's 50, which is interesting because that means that George Bernard Shaw is in the public domain in Canada, but he's still protected by copyright in the United States. Now, copyright applies in the country that you're in. So if you're in Canada, you follow Canadian copyright law. So even if you're doing a Shaw play who is not a Canadian, you're following Canadian law. And if you're in the US, you're following US law. If you're in the UK, you're following UK law. So it depends on where it is that you're actually using the work.
So we want to wrap up here just by saying that if you're still sort of like swirling in the clouds with some copyright, we do have a copyright cheat sheet just for drama teachers. Where can they find that?
Oh, they can go to dramateacheracademy.com, all one word, dramateacheracademy.com. What you do there is you click the join button, but we're not going to make you join the DTA. Right now, the DTA is closed for new members. So what we're doing is I'm giving you a free copyright cheat sheet. Once you get the copyright cheat sheet, I'm also going to send you, spoiler alert, I'm going to send you a couple of other little video lessons as well as some lesson plans so you can actually take this into the classroom and teach it to your kids.
You too can be a copyright guru. So, before we go, let's do some Theater Folk news. We're talking about copyright, and this is a great time to talk about where you can find the information you need to properly process copyright for our plays. So, if you go to theaterfolk.com, every play of ours has its own page. For example, right now, Craig, would you click on the page for our brand new play, The Snow Queen? This is an adaptation of the Hans Christian Andersen story by Mrs. Evelyn Merritt, which they also say is the basis for Frozen, but it's very loosely based. Okay, so and every play has a page with this information. So how much is a book for The Snow Queen, Craig? You can find this information on this page.
It is $6.95, Lindsay.
And how did you find that?
Because I went to the Snow Queen page. I'm not sure where we're going here.
And you scrolled down?
I scrolled down and I saw, that's right, I scrolled down to find the price of the book.
Oh, yeah, I think we should have rehearsed this or something. Okay, so yes, you scrolled down and there's some other information there too. For example, if you're going to do one performance of this play, how much would that be?
The royalty for this play is $40.
And can you videotape this play?
You can. There is an optional videotape license available with every single one of our plays, and that is always equivalent to an extra royalty fee.
Because if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Craig Mason, a video copy of the show would be a derivative work.
It would. Yes, that is correct. It is a derivative work. Now I see where we're going here.
Oh, I feel like I'm learning. All right. So, yes, every page, every play of ours has its own page. So when you're asking these questions about what you have to pay for, how much it costs, always go to theaterfolk.com. Finally, where can you find this podcast? We post new episodes every second Tuesday at theaterfolk.com and on our Facebook page and Twitter. You can find us on youtube.com/theaterfolk. You can find us on the Stitcher app, and you can also subscribe to TFP on iTunes. All you have to do is search on the word Theaterfolk. And that's where we're going to end. Take care, my friends. Take care.
Guru out.